utmost honor to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Tan Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak. Tan Sri, can you raise your hand and say hi to everyone? Alhamdulillah. He looks very good and healthy.
Introduction, make it short.
So, a towering public intellectual and prolific columnist, he has been writing weekly social commentary since 1995, reflecting on issues from education to ethics, science to society. So today, he will be speaking on sharing first-hand experiences, why and how on Social Writing Weekly since 1995. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tan Sri Dzulkifli Abdul Razak for this floor. You are kindly invited, Prof. Tan Sri.
Thank you very much. I think your moderating has inspired me. I mean,
Alhamdulillah.
the way you deliver the emotion, the gestures, really has motivated me. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. And also thank you very much for Dr. Siti Suryani, which I knew maybe 2014 when I first was introduced to USIM. Professor Rushan, long-time friend, and I'm hoping that Professor Ilya is also there, and all of you, brothers and sisters, for spending time this morning to listen to my rambling. I call it rambling because for the first time that I'm sharing this on a personal basis. There's no PowerPoint this time around. I just want to talk from my heart. How does this happen over the last 30 years? When I started in April 1995, there was no inkling that this will go on and on. As usual, after you quit your job, everything else also fall flat and you start something new, but not this one. This one, I think, seems to continue, that it has become part and parcel of my life. It's almost like Sembahyang Jumaat now. If you don't write one article a week, you don't feel you have fulfilled your duty. So it is ingrained into my habit, and how do I get into this is something that I also want to share with you, right? So let us start by going back to the recitation of the Quran this morning. The three words that strikes me is membaca. Yeah? Kalau nak membaca, there must be something yang tertulis. If there's nothing written, what is there to read? Maknanya prerequisite to reading is writing. You have nothing to read if you don't write. A good example is Utusan Melayu, Susuk Khabar Jawi. Used to be there, and now there's no longer the Susuk Khabar Jawi. And I think we nak membaca, there's nothing to read in terms of tulisan Jawi. So when you talk about this Quranic verse, you talk membaca, implicit in this, there must be something which is written, right? And of course, ayat 4, dia kata mengajar dengan pena, exactly what your Pemula is all about. The pena is substantively, as an English punya proverb, is mightier than the sword. So the latent usefulness of that pen. And it is not that pen that actually talks about it. And I'll give you one very simple example. When I was back from USM and I was called to talk to the past punya members di Kelantan. Masa tu arwah Nik Aziz was still around, and he was there to listen to my talk. I'm a young academic, and to talk to this very august personality makes me feel nervous. But what happens then was when he started to take notes when I write, and he used just a simple big pen, blue in color, transparent, and dia nulis pakai pen tu je. I think that pen will probably not cost more than a ringgit. Good. And we here in university, at least myself, I was thinking what sort of pen I'm going to use. Mont Blanc, Shepherd's, Parker, all these big pen. And suddenly I see Aziz Arwah use just this big pen. And it dawns on me, it's not the pen, it's what comes out of the pen. So it could be Shepherd's, but it comes out nonsense, then the Shepherd's does not mean anything. So I postponed my idea of buying an expensive pen, and I stick to this pen, young ordinary, because the substance that comes out of the pens is more important than what the pen is all about. Yeah. So that is a second lesson that I learned. And the third lesson from the ayat tadi itu, untuk mengajar yang kita tidak ketahui from our perspective. And therefore, from our point of view, when we write, we also want to mengajar in that sense. Maybe not mengajar in a literal sense, but sharing information, as mentioned by me, how do you bring this information to other people so that other people can use this information to make informed decision, to be very powerful because they know a lot more than what they are supposed to know, given the kind of writings and the reading that they've got there. So that would probably summarize why I actually got into this writing thing. I came back from apa ni, a postgraduate training in 1980s. At that time, I think university was quite a different university. We don't have KPIs. We just do what we think we ought to do, and therefore I decided to do certain things that the university do not even recognize, and that is social writing. Of course, everybody wants to talk about publication because that is used for promotion and so on and so forth. But in USM, at that time, I think we were very conscious about how we relate ourselves to the society. And this is because of institutions like CAP, Consumers Association of Penang, IOCU, International Organizations of Consumers Union, Third World Network. There's a lot of this community-based organization that reach out for the public. All right. And I happen to be part of them and suddenly find there is a lacuna between what the university is all about and between what the community wants. There is no connection at all. Yeah. And how do you build this connection is to begin to associate yourself with them and learn what they want and try to bridge the gap between what the university is supposed to do and what do they want in terms of that. So this orientation of public writing becomes part and parcel of my quote unquote aspiration. And how do I reach? And particularly in Penang, when we talk about the community, it is mostly the Malay community, which is the minority in Penang. That unless you reach out for them, then there's nobody who actually wants to reach out for them. So that brings me into this whole idea. And each time when I write, what will the community think? How do you serve the community best as far as that's concerned? And therefore, that becomes one of the quote unquote activity that I volunteered myself to. Of course, you still want to write academically because you're an academician, but the demands to write for the community is another demand. And that demand is what I think most of us gets a little bit uncomfortable. For example, when we write for the public, normally, I think Surani can correct me if I'm wrong. Your writing should not be more than 1,000 words. I mean, they will not be able to write 2,000 words, 3,000 words and put it in a newspaper unless it's a special edition. But otherwise, between 800 to 1,000 words is quite sufficient for them to actually accommodate. And anything beyond that or anything less than that will be kind of difficult. So how to write something that you know as an expert, quote unquote, in your discipline, and to condense it in 800 words is the biggest challenge that I've got. Right? We know about it so much that to write 2,000 words, no problem. But to reduce it to 800 words or 1,000, to be fair, it's not going to be easy. So when I started, I think one article take me at least 4 days to write. You know, tulis cancel. Masa tu tak ada komputer typewriter pula. And the T-Pex, I say T-Pex, T-Pex ini one man sort of typewriting. So it takes 4 days to write, and it's really a harassment. I mean, there's more things to do, but yet you need to complete this. And I think that was the kind of perseverance that we need to go through. Some people do not have the patience or the perseverance. After all, forget about this. After all, it doesn't count for masa tu for promotion. You can write whatever it is. They still want this, first aid journal kind of a thing. So that's the first lesson that I think all of us need to get into for those of you who want to. You must have the time and the patience and the perseverance to make sure that your writing at the end of the day serves a purpose. All right. But just to give you a contrast now, if I were to write, it takes me 4 hours just to write, or even less than that, because you are so used to it that the 4 days becomes condensed into the kind of thing that you do. So writing in that particular sense, net needs that kind of a determination. If you want to write in a professional and a committed way, then I think that one needs to be developed. But if you want to write once in a while, I think that's a different story altogether. Yeah. So how do I get into this? As I mentioned to you, apart from just writing uh, because of the community engagement that I've got, there is also a sense of purpose. When I come back, everybody was doing research on traditional medicine. And the reason is quite simple, because the dean is interested in traditional medicine. Now, if your dean is interested in traditional medicine, then if you do research on traditional medicine, you can get better sort of funding, better insights, because everything else is laid out because of his interest and his influence, right? So I was also trying to do this traditional medicine thing, but somehow or other I fell through because there's too many people who wants to do traditional medicine, and therefore there is no quote unquote differentiation as far as the school of pharmacy is concerned. In fact, the whole nation was then looking at traditional medicine as an area of expertise that we need to develop in Malaysia at that particular time. So I make a decision to move out of traditional medicine and start my own sort of quote unquote area of expertise, if you were to say it that way. Now, one of the areas in pharmacy at that particular time was about information. We were the first school of pharmacy. People do not know what pharmacy is all about. Some people think pharmacy is about pharmacy when you read, tangan, what your nasib is all about, So we need to puts this perspective right. And that's where I think we took the kind of initiative. How do we inform the public of what pharmacy is all about? That is in the year 1970, 1980s, when there's hardly any pharmacy. The word pharmacy also is alien to many people. So we redirected ourselves very much like what Nurani is trying to do now, to go into a writing session where we can communicate with other people, not in one way, but two ways. So in other words, this column that we're going to start is basically announcing that we are available, but we are here also to actually fulfill your needs and your wishes as far as information is concerned. Now we talk about medicine, for example. Yeah, it sounds very simple. You go to the dispensary and they say makan satu hari satu kali and stuff like that, and I think we got it done. But there is not enough information in that particular sense. We want to know whether when to eat it, how to eat it, and why you do this. So all these are information that gives the user a better use of medicine so that they can heal a lot more faster, rather than, sometimes the trick in pharmacy, you let them come to the pharmacy 3 kali before you really tell about the medicine, because by then you make enough money. Bagi sekali, just like that, dia akan datang balik lagi sekali. By the third time, you have enough money, then okay, this is the proper way of doing it. And this is what is called the therapeutic sort of dispensing and so forth. So those kind of a practice is something that we do not agree, and we want the visit to be as short as possible and the healing to be as fast as possible, and that is all about information. And the information is so important that most people do not understand it because it is written in a jargon that many people also will not be understanding. And therefore, the word jargon is something that is another issue. How do you simplify your writing so that at the end of the day, people read it and understand it? I think I am now crossing, for example, to give you a good example, when we talk about Lestari, it is a word that many people use because it is a translation from the word sustainability. All right? But we have tested many times. If you go down to the ground and ask Makcik Lestari ke hari ni? Then Makcik will not be able to answer it. In fact, I've got one Makcik that says, Makcik tak pakai Listerine, Makcik pakai Colgate, katanya. because the closest word Lestari is one that she has heard before, is Listerine, perhaps. Yeah. So we are now trying to bring this one. This is why we are now starting this movement called Sejahtera, because we think the word Sejahtera meets better our cultural understanding as far as the people is going to tanya. Masjid Sejahtera ke hari ini, she can go to town and talk about what Kesejahteraan is all about. So the choice of word, the jargon that we need to simplify in doing public scholarship writing is another big burden that we need to bear. Yeah. During my time, we have got a committee that used to find what is a nice word for a certain English word, rather than put informasi, family, just by changing the spelling, does not serve the purpose. We go into the real word, and this is where I think writing becomes more important. So we go into perkataan-perkataan daripada bahasa Jawa, bahasa Melayu yang lain, and take them into our use and popularize it that way. So that's how I started. I started by quote unquote trying to make other people knowledgeable, as the Quran says, to fill up the gap, yeah, what we know, and share that with them. And I hope this goes into the hadith that says, at the end of the day, after we die, three things that is good. One is about the knowledge that we pass on to people. And that knowledge, what we pass on to people, is something in my context becomes very, very important, because it will stay. As long as the knowledge is used, it will stay, and you will gain, inshallah, barakah from that point of view. I want to bring this in because at the end of the day, there's no money to be made. Yeah. If you think writing brings money and stuff like that, from my experience, there is none. When you started, I think the newspaper people say you are lucky that we give you a column, right? And that column, sometimes if you see the translation, dan 800 perkataan tu, when they give me the translated, they kata, this column is worth 100 ringgit, 100,000 ringgit, something like that. Ada nilai dia. I think Surani can tell you better. So in other words, by giving you that, already that amount of money is something that they sacrifice in terms of the use of the column. So there is the money worth that, but you will not get the ringgit as such. The money worth is just on that publishing and also the publicity that you get out of it. Yeah? So I then started to write on medicine, an area that I know well, explaining people what medicine is all about and so on and so forth. And that, I think, creates a two-way traffic. So people write to me and ask questions, and I can write to them again. And there is this rapport that we do not get in academic writing. Kita adalah citation ni agaknya, tapi di citation ni most likely they don't even contact you. They just take your words and put there written by Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, and that's it. But in this column, people will actually write you. Sometimes they even call you. In the case of when I moved into the Poison Center, the National Poison Center, where we operate 24 hours a day. So they call you, and they call you at odd times, at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is often the time where poisoning took place. Orang nak bunuh diri, dia about that time. Yeah. So they will call you late at night, and you have to respond. Sometimes, you're also sleeping and you are not sure what the question is all about. Yeah. So we operated at that point at a 24-hour service where people can call you, and that will be the kind of ultimate as far as saving life is concerned, giving contribution is concerned. This is something that sticks to our mind, because at the end of the day, you can say, today I have saved 2 lives. Today I have saved 1 life. Today I have made people feel better, which cannot be quantified in terms of money. Yeah, how much their life saved means. So sometimes in this period, when the new Vice Chancellor came, dia kata pusat racun negara ni tak buat duit. And I think there were 2 attempts to close it down. Now, I think to survive, you must bring money to the university. And if you don't bring money to the university, they say you are a cost center, and therefore you are entitled to be closed down. Yeah, they don't see the idea that saving life is also about money in a way. All right. So if you save 3 lives, how many? That's how much does it cost? You wouldn't know. But the question of cost is already there. So many of the work that we do has that intrinsic cost behind it, although it is not written in black and white as many of the other things that's concerned. So we keep ourselves into this, and this is where writing becomes important. So masa di Pusat Racun, kita ada also a weekly journal that talks about the current issue of the day. I think the word currency is also important. What you want to write is something that people wants to know now, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, unless it's an anniversary, like today, 80th anniversary of the atomic bomb. It's something that you can write. Otherwise, if you write it maybe some other time yang tak ada kena-mengena dengan apa yang berlaku pada community, then probably not get published also in this country. So the currency, the consistency of writing, I think is very important. So I want to recap. One is about issues that is current. It is, and it must be consistent. If you want to get your message across, that message must be repeated again and again in whatever form. Then it will stick into people's mind. If you just write today and then tomorrow shift on into another issue that has nothing to do with the previous one, then maybe you probably lost your readership and also your interest at the same time, right? So very quickly, I think I was with the Pusat Racun Negara from 1995. We built it up because there's a need for the country. At that time, there was no resource center that talks about poisoning and how the toxicity actually is affecting the life of anybody. So within that area, then we pick up another issue that is important to us, and it's about smoking. That's why I asked you about Akal tadi. Smoking in the 70s and the 80s are rampant. There is no laws, there is no awareness. In fact, smoking in developing and Muslim countries is among the worst because the nicotine level is very high, the quality of cigarette is very bad, that you can get worse cancer than people in the developed country with the filters and so on and so forth, right? So that becomes an issue to us. How do you train people to stop smoking as a kind of activities that would sustain a lifelong process? Yeah. So we developed a very comprehensive National Poison Center that not only campaign against tobacco, but also talks about the policy that needs to be taken up to stop tobacco control. Now then you can see that we have moved into another level, not just educating the public, but we're also educating the decision makers, people who are actually implementing and all these kind of things. So that level of discussion is a different level of discussion. You need to give them the rationale of why this is important and how this is done, because the counterpart, the cigarette company, also do the same thing. The cigarette company, for example, the one of the issues that normally kita katakan the government must increase tax for smoking so that people will go into quitting smoking as much as possible. Now, the counter argument from the other side will say, if you increase tax on smoking, then people will start to resort to smuggling. Yeah, to dia punya counter. So you must know where they're coming from, so that you can write about it and go against it to what they are trying to preach as far as the policymakers, assuming that the policymakers are not well educated in this issue, right? And in fact, the evidence is now when you increase tobacco tax, the cigarette company will quote unquote sponsor smuggling. So you'll find that Each time there is an increase in tobacco tax, suddenly you find the number of smugglers or the number of cigarettes that is being confiscated by the authorities increases, right? And these are actually being sponsored by the tobacco industries to tell the government, you have increased the tax and therefore smuggling has gone up. Smuggling has gone up. Yeah. So benda-benda macam ini becomes very, very difficult to know until and unless you are on the ground. I'll give you another example. Dalam cigarette, there are 10 things in the cigarette that makes you addicted. And this is something that nobody knows about. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you, if you look at the filter, around the filter, there are 10 very tiny holes. And nobody knows about this. Why the tiny holes? Because when you actually smoke the cigarette and you hold the cigarette in such a way that you block the holes, and then when you smoke and you suck in the air, then the air will bring in the tar and the nicotine at the same time, and you get more addictive. These are very, very subtle way of increasing addiction that we need to demystify and tell the public what is happening with just one cigarette. Yeah, many other things that we can talk about. What I'm trying to tell you is that you must be knowledgeable. In other words, this is where the reading comes in. You must read a lot more so that you can pass this information to your readers and writers and so on and so forth. Right. So those are the activities that I did from the year 1995 when we started the Poison Center with a group of people just like your Ilmu and Pemula. We train a number of writers, students, and staff can write issues of this nature for the public to consume. Now, unfortunately, by year 2000, I was asked to be the Vice Chancellor. And therefore, I have to go pass on this writing of poisons and stuff like that to the staff in the Poison Center. And I have to take a new role. And the new role that I take is to understand what education is all about. And these are to be frank with you, Roshan will probably realize this. When I became the Vice Chancellor in year 2000, I know nothing about education. I can say this for almost all of us. Kita masuk dalam kuliah ni, kita masuk dalam fakulti ni, I think we do not know anything about education or know very little about education. Now, you are a lecturer, you can do this, you can forget about it. If you're a Vice Chancellor, you don't know anything about the education, how are you going to run it? Yeah. So I have to start all over again. Yeah, I'm a science student. Science students normally are not interested in many things because we are just working in the labs with the animals and the equipment and sometimes not human being also. So our world is a very isolated, small world. What happened outside the world is nothing of our interest. Only later on, when anything happen that needs to be marketed, and then we get into this. Yeah. I have to start all over again and re-educate myself what education is all about. My God, that's already 20 years into the university. 20 years into the university, not knowing what education is all about. I think it's very embarrassing. But that's why I say it's the first time I'm admitting this to the public. That when I became the Vice Chancellor in 2000, I do not know what education is. And sometimes I'm very amazed, yeah. The moment people jadi naib chancellor besok, semalam dia tak naib chancellor pun. Besok tu dia naik chancellor dan dia tahu everything. Ini dia nak tukar, itu dia nak tukar, ini dia nak buat, itu dia nak buat. Tapi semua orang lain kena buat, dia tak payah buat. Now, this is what I noticed after being 40 years in this thing. You know, the new Vice Chancellor will suddenly become the all-knower and or the all-doer and basically wants to do everything. Yeah. And that's why, for my own analysis, our university failed because we do not have the substance of what education is all about. Yeah. And as you read now, for example, I'm going to write an article this week about how Australia has banned people at the age of below 16 into social media. I think you must have read this. Yeah. You under 16, you are not supposed to have an account on TikTok, on Snapchat, on Facebook, on YouTube, on also Twitter or the X. You are not supposed to hold an account because you are banned from using this. You know, and this is the first time any country in the world has done so, because they have made their study. These people, when they go into this social media, this is the one that sets their mind thinking in a different way. So we need to educate them first before we let them loose into the social media. I mean, Australia can do it. It could have been Malaysia. Yeah, because our rate of social media is also fantastically high. But I don't hear any of the ministers or even the government talk in these terms. Right? So in other words, the understanding of what education and what education does to our self and our next generation is something that this is open thing. Now bila Australia dah buat, now Norway nak ikut, France the ones who do, and I'm sure very slowly our ministers and government also will follow suit. Right? Meaning to say that we are not there when we talk about what education is all about, moving into the future, what is the impact on the pandemic on education and so on. So it becomes of my business now. Maybe I'm not a rector or a vice chancellor anymore, but I think I hold that particular commitment to educate myself and also the people, particularly the parents who do not know much about education. So I've taken, quote unquote, at that particular point, the year 2000, to find what is education is all about, and it's quite embarrassing to admit them now. But Alhamdulillah, God is kind to me, and somehow or other, this document called Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan appeared from I don't know where, right? When I read this Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, then I realized that we have missed what education is all about. What we talked about now, from my point of view, and I'm prepared to debate with anybody, is not education. It's anything but education. Yeah. Realizing that, then it becomes another burden on myself to educate people, or at least to make people aware there is such a thing called Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, or before that, Falsafah Pendidikan Negara, which is now 35 years old. And if I ask a very quick straw vote, how many of you have heard of this? Or if you have heard of this, how many of you know what this Falsafah is all about? That needs to be translated. This is part of the Education Act 1996 to be translated into education. And I don't think many knows, including the vice chancellors of all universities. I can say that for sure. Yeah. So ini menjadi satu amanah kepada saya to make sure that we understand the education philosophy, so that is the education that needs to be delivered on the ground as far as the policy is concerned. Yeah. And just to quench your appetite so that I don't leave you hanging, there are 5 elements in this Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, which I've mentioned in my last talk. Yeah. One is a definition of education from Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan that talks about dianya mesti berterusan, mesti menyeluruh, mesti bersepadu. In the modern jargon, it has to be ongoing or lifelong. It will be holistic. It has to be integrated. USIM, in this case, is very, very lucky because yours is more holistic and more integrated with this Akli and Akli as compared to USM, the science university that is not Islamic. We are less integrated as compared to what USIM has got. But USIM must realize this. That's why when Suryani start this ilmu and Pemula, I am very happy because this is where the integration can come. This is where the Falsafah Pendidikan can be realized in that particular context. So the writing that we're going to do has to be continuous. In other words, it is not, a writing because I want to write, but it's writing to serve a purpose, and one of the purposes is the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. The second element in that Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan talks about, quote-unquote, balance untuk menghasilkan insan, seimbang dan harmonis. So it is not about employability, it's not about employment, it's not about graduate numbers, it is not. It is about whether the person that comes out of USIM or any university in Malaysia are balanced and harmonious. But implicitly, it means if you are balanced and harmonious, you are certainly more employable than the people who are not balanced and not harmonious. So that means that we still do not discount jobs. Jobs are important, but prior to the job, the person must be made in such a way that they are deserving for the job or the best of job that there is. Yeah. And the third one, very quickly, it talks about bila kata harmonious, harmony dan balance ni apa dia? It talks about question like dari segi intellect, dari segi jasmani, dari segi rohani dan dari segi emosi. Right? Again, if you look around your curriculum, we are good at intellect, we are good at jasmani, at the co-curriculum, but we don't have much on emosi, we don't have much on spirituality. Again, I think USIM has got an advantage on this, right? And then dia kata, on what basis? Dia katakan ketaatan dan kepatuhan kepada Tuhan. It's not because you want to be a world-class university. It's not because of university in America. It's not because of university in UK. It's not because of something else. I think ours is back to the back to that. How do you actually create the balance in that particular sense, right? And then baru the fourth one mengatakan bila kita dah ada ini baru kita mencapai apa dia panggil kesejahteraan diri. And therefore the word sejahtera to me suddenly I discover it is a very meaningful word. In other words, if I want to know whether my student is educated or my staff is educated, dirinya mesti sejahtera. So education is about to create that human being that is sejahtera, which is not translated in English because it has a multiple meaning. We can go into that later. It's not just about happiness. It's not just about well-being. It's not just about wellness, the way this singular word has been used as far as the English is concerned. So this is where I come back to this whole idea, why it is important to write, because the sejahtera takes context of Malaysia, of budaya kita, of nilai kita. And if you are not the one who writes about this or inform our readers or teachers or students about it, then who else? Then you will resort into the English writing. When the English writing back, it goes to a one-liner rather than this one ideas that we need to talk about as far as sejahtera is concerned, which I say now is more complicated or more comprehensive than sustainability. Yeah. Sustainability, if you look at the definition, it is about organizing the present life so that the future will not be compromised. They talk about the present and the future. Sejahtera talks about even the past. So dalam sustainability, the past does not get involved at all. But sejahtera talks about the past. And the reason why it talks about the past is go back to kita punya kefahaman, ya, dari segi kepemimpinan. When we talk about, katanya kalau kita sesat jalan, kita balik kepada pangkal jalan. In other words, we go back to the past. Because the past to us is a reference point. Yeah? Our fitrah, in a way, could be said like that. You need to go back to your fitrah and find out where's the way forward. Whereas the English way of managing is everything must change. There's no past anymore. And that's why when we articulate this at the United Nations, at the UNESCO level, that we say the past is important, now only they realize about indigenous contribution. That's why we talk about sustainability now in the West. They talk about how indigenous is your understanding of sustainability. Because the roots of sustainability comes from the culture where it originates from. So you cannot talk about sustainability in Malaysia as though we are Americans. It doesn't work. We cannot talk about sustainability in Malaysia as though we are United Nations, United Kingdom. It doesn't work because ours is ours, and the values, and the norms, and the culture is ingrained into this. And that's why when we talk about sustainability in many occasions, we try to bring as much as possible the Malay words, the Malay meaning, and also the indigenous understanding of how this should be. Now, this again calls for writing. If you don't write about it, then nobody knows. Yeah? The only Malay word in the world dictionary is amo. That's about the only word I know. Now the word sejahtera is slowly coming in. Yeah. One of our PhD students in UIA is a UNESCO punya staff. She'll be getting a PhD on sejahtera. So the whole idea of writing in this particular context will graduate as where you are now. So I am now into this whole idea of education, understanding falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, trying to make sense of it and try to implement it in the education system that is created for it. And right now, when we talk about, I'm sorry, I want to use the word Madani. Where is Madani in the context of pendidikan kebangsaan? Ini orang tak mau tanya pun tak berani, ataupun tak berani tanya. Bagi saya, there is none. Yeah. And this becomes another issue later on. So, bagaimana kita menggunakan falsafah itu untuk menghidupkan balik pendidikan? Seperti mana yang dikendaki oleh falsafah. Dan kalau tidak ada falsafah ini, maknanya pendidikan kita akan jadi syasha merbak. Macam marba maknanya if okay, QS say this, good education will follow that one, and somebody else said time say this one, we will follow this one, and if the minister say this, we follow this one, you know. So every minister change, everything will change, and our pendidikan will never be stabilized and will never be quote unquote menyeluruh, bersepadu dan holistik. Right. So my last section was basically now that I've gone into pendidikan. Suddenly, pendidikan takes a different turn. And this is where sustainability comes. Dia kata, you have to educate for sustainable development. You don't just educate for the sake of education as it was before. There is a purpose. Reorienting it to sustainability for the Agenda 2030. In other words, by 2030, which is 5 years from now, we should be able to say that our education system is realigned to the 17 goals of sustainability. And that becomes now another core business of how I would make this a case for education moving forward, particularly after the pandemic, yeah, and whatever that's going now with Trumps and so on and so forth. How do you suit into that? And therefore, the writing that we are talking about now, the AI, ChatGPT, will be realigned to this, so that by the time we arrive at 2030, we know exactly where we are and what we are doing to impress the world that education in Malaysia is as world class as any other education in other parts of the world within our context. We don't have to abandon our context just because we want to be world class. Yeah? Orang tanya saya, is your university world class? And my question to him is, which world are you talking about? Yeah. In my world, I'm certainly world class, but in my world, your university may not be first class because your context and my context. So this the idea of one size fits all does not hold. So in Malaysia pun kita, USIM mesti berbeza dengan UIA. UIA mesti berbeza dengan USM. USM, all university must be different because your context are different. But what's happening now is basically kita disamakan saja. Yeah? One size fits all. Nama pun sama ya. Kalau student tu mesti HEPA. Hal ehwal pembangunan pelajar dan alumni. Yeah. Masa saya di USM, we don't call it HEPA. Kita panggil hal ehwal pembangunan pelajar. We want to be different because we are working on a different model. So these are issues that I think make writing very, very important because this is the only way that you can voice out and it remains. Lain bercakap, saya bercakap ni, kalau tak direkod, tidaklah. And that will go. But for writing, the moment you write it, then it will stay there. And sometimes the writing comes back to you. In what sense? I got invited to write, to speak. They said, can you speak on this? I say, how do you know? Oh, I saw your writing in this year and you are talking about this and we want to hear from you. So your writing becomes your credential. It's a document that it will stay there, meaning to say if you make mistake or if you say something which is wrong or you say something which is superfluous, it will remain as part of your quote unquote negligent or whatever else. So writing in that sense becomes a very important documentation of who you are. Then people will not forget you. If people want to find out what you have done wrong, they will go back to your writing, analyze it here. And this is a good example that I'm giving you when they want to remove the president of Harvard. I think you recall masa apa tu the Hamas punya what do you call massacre. They find that Harvard, Columbia, Pennsylvania, MIT, so many are pro-Palestinian, right? And the Zionist groups want to get rid of this president, okay? And they are able to get rid of many, three I think so far. But Harvard ni dia tak boleh. Dia tak boleh, but this lady knows how to defend herself as far as the policy is concerned. And what did they do? They go back to her thesis, which is probably 20 years old, and go down the thesis and found out there are 4 places where she didn't put an inverted commas on the quotation that she cites. And dia jadikan ini salah satu daripada excuse because she plagiarizes. By omitting the quotation signs, dia kata she has plagiarized, she has not quote unquote put the reference and the citation, and because of that, she needs to leave. And the alumni of Harvard supported it, and finally she resigned. This is another example. Yeah, when you write, you don't just write carelessly, but you must write with that apa tu thing in mind that people will use your writing against you if you are not sure as far as the quotation and seeing and so forth. Yeah. So I've taken more than I need to, but that is just a summary of why I do and how I do it in a sense that we need to come to terms of what is the purpose of Pemula. It's not about promoting ourselves. It's about promoting the community. And within that, perhaps we have got a share of it, alhamdulillah, but that is not the mainstay. Kalau that's the mainstay, then it becomes another difficult process. Because everybody will think that, aku pilih ni, what do I get? Tak promote, tak naik promotion, and so on and so forth. Then the whole idea of ilmu and formula becomes vague, and finally you will lose your direction in that sense. Yeah. So I will stop here. And I will just want to thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. And I do hope some of this could be used for you. And if there are any question you want to ask, I will try to answer it as best I could. So, terima kasih banyak. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay.